There are two things I need you to hold in your mind at once, and I need you to hold them even though they don't fit together yet. The first, I loved my son. Completely. Without condition. The way you love something you made and then watched leave your hands and become its own person, imperfect and bewildering and still, somehow, yours. That love did not go anywhere. It did not diminish. Not during any part of this story, not after. The second, on a Tuesday evening in October, in a dining room I had helped paint the color of warm sand, that same son stood up from his chair and announced to 11 members of our extended family what I would be doing with the rest of my life. He had not asked me. He did not think he needed to. Those two things, the love and what he did with it, are both true, both real. I am not going to reconcile them for you quickly, because it took me longer than an evening to understand how both could be, and you deserve the same time I had to sit with it. But I will tell you this, right now, at the beginning, before any of the rest. I was not surprised. Not the way he thought I would be. I had been sitting on something for 11 months by the time that dinner happened. A folder in the drawer of my nightstand, getting heavier one page at a time, and by that October Saturday, it was full. Signed, dated, already notarized. He announced my future at dinner. I had already signed my name to it in ink. Let me take you back to the spring that started everything, because you need to understand what the ground felt like before it shifted. My name is Frances Dunmore. I turned 70 in February of that year, which I mention only to tell you that I did not find the number alarming. I've stood in hospital corridors at 3 a.m. in 4 different countries, while decisions were made that could not be unmade. And 70 is a birthday, not an emergency. I came home from nursing, international flight nursing, the kind where you accompany critical patients between facilities across continents. After 31 years, and I came home to a house on a quarter-acre lot in western Massachusetts that my husband Gerald and I had purchased in 1989 for $87,000. Gerald died in 2019, pancreatic, 7 weeks from diagnosis to the white oak table he had built the spring of 2004, standing empty at one end because he was no longer there to sit at it. I still have that table. I will tell you what became of it. When Gerald died, I thought a great deal about what comes next, not in a dark way. I have been around enough death professionally to understand that it is not the end of your narrative. It is a hard cut, a new scene without a title card. I did not begin imagining myself as a widow before I had finished being a wife, and after the grief, which was real, and which took the better part of 2 years to work itself through in any meaningful sense, there came something I had not entirely anticipated. Curiosity about what I would do with the time that remained, about what shape my days might take if I let them take a shape I chose. Gerald and I had talked about travel, not in the urgent way, not in the way of people who feel time running short, but in the comfortable abstract way of couples who believe the conversation can wait. About going back to places we had only seen from inside a transport plane or through a hospital window. About Portugal, specifically, which Gerald had heard described by a colleague of his once, a surgeon who had retired there, who had mentioned the light, the food, the pace of a life that didn't feel like it was apologizing for slowing down. Gerald had heard that description at a medical conference in 2016 and never entirely stopped mentioning it. I started making a list, not plans exactly. A list, the kind you make when you aren't yet certain what you're allowed to want. Bram, my son, my youngest, 38 that spring, with his father's jaw and his own particular way of standing with his arms crossed that he has had since he was about 11 years old. Bram had 2 children by then. Mira, who was 4, curious about everything in the exhausting and wonderful way of children who have learned that questions get answers. And the baby, Theo, who had arrived in January and had not yet stopped being a mystery to everyone in his vicinity, including himself. Bram's wife, Odette, had taken 6 months of leave from her position as an account director at a marketing firm in Hartford. She was due back in July. She was a good mother. I want to say that plainly and mean it. She was patient with Mira in the particular long-legged, easily distracted way that Mira required, and she approached Theo with the focused intensity of someone who has read every book and knows, somewhere underneath the confidence, that books only get you so far. She was not a villain in this story. I need you to understand that before I tell you what she did, because the two things are connected in a way that matters. What Odette was, quietly and undeniably, was tired. And when she looked at me, I could see her doing arithmetic. I noticed it in February at my birthday dinner. Bram had organized the evening, which meant the restaurant he chose was the one that had availability on short notice and also had a parking lot, which I note not as criticism, but as information about how he moves through the world. There were 8 of us at the table. Bram and Odette, and both children, my daughter Petra and her husband Cal, my sister-in-law Renata, who had been Gerald's younger sister and had decided, in the months after his death, that I had become her project, and a woman named Diane, a neighbor of Bram's, whom I had met exactly twice, and whose presence at my 70th birthday dinner I never did find an explanation for. I chose not to ask. Odette sat across from me with Theo in the carrier strapped to her chest, and at some point during the appetizers she leaned forward and said, quietly, but not quite quietly enough, "We've been thinking it might be good for you to have more time with the kids. After July, I mean." I said, "That sounds like fun." She nodded. She glanced at Bram. He was talking to Cal about something involving his hands. "More structured," she said, "like a real arrangement." "We'd have to talk about it," I said. "Yes," she said, "we should." What I did not say, because it was my birthday, and because the soup was about to arrive, and because I have learned over 7 decades that most things said before they are ready do more damage than silence, was that 3 weeks prior, I had sent a query to a relocation consultant in Lisbon. Her name was Sophia. A former colleague who had retired there 4 years earlier had given me the contact and had not stopped sending me photographs of the afternoon light coming off the Tagus, photographs that I had looked at in the evenings when the house was quiet with a feeling I had no name for yet, but that I was beginning to recognize. I had started my list. I was beginning to turn it into something else. Spring moved the way spring does in western Massachusetts, slowly at first, reluctant, and then all at once. The forsythia outside the kitchen window came in yellow before anything else, and then the lilac along the fence that Gerald had planted our first year in the house, and then suddenly everything at once, and the light changing and staying longer, and the particular smell of the yard after rain that I have not found a word for in 35 years of living there, but that I would know in the dark. Bram called regularly, bi-weekly, which is what he had always done, and which I always appreciated. He asked about my health, my plans, how I was occupying my time. I told him I was fine, reading, walking, puttering with the garden in the way that I always have. Gerald was the real gardener. I am more of an interested bystander, and occasionally driving to the library in town for whatever program they happened to be running. He seemed satisfied by this. It described a mother who was present, accessible, pleasantly occupied, and available. He had no reason to question it. I did not offer more. In early April, I received an email from Sophia, the relocation consultant, with a detailed overview of the visa options available to me as an American retiree. I sat at Gerald's table with my reading glasses and went through it page by page, slowly, with a yellow legal pad beside me for notes. The D7 passive income visa, what it required, what it cost, what it permitted. When I finished, I made a cup of tea and I sat with it, and I thought about what I was actually doing, which was not filling out forms. What I was doing was giving myself permission. That took a little while. It required acknowledging something I had not quite let myself acknowledge yet, that the life I had been living since Gerald died, while not unhappy, was a waiting room, comfortable and familiar, and not quite mine. I had been living it for other people's peace of mind, Bram's, Petra's, Renata's, and I had let them believe it was enough, because questioning it felt too large, too disruptive, too much like deciding that what I wanted mattered more than what was convenient for the people who loved me. And you cannot make that decision easily. At least I cannot. I am my mother's daughter, and my mother's mother's granddaughter, and the women in my family express love by making themselves useful, which is a beautiful thing, and also a trap, if you stay in it too long. I had been useful my entire adult life. For 31 years in a professional context in which being useful sometimes meant the difference between whether someone made it home. For 34 years of marriage in which being useful and being loved were so intertwined that I could not always tell them apart. For 5 years since Gerald's death, in which being useful had become the main thing I had to offer to the people around me, because grief had taken the rest, and usefulness was what remained. I was done with the waiting room, not with the love, with the waiting. In May, I drove to Boston for a long weekend. 2 items on the agenda: a meeting with a visa consultant whose office was on the 3rd floor of a building near South Station, and dinner with my friend Constance, who had retired from pediatric surgery and now spent roughly half her year in the south of France, a fact she mentioned with the serene satisfaction of someone who has found a very good secret and is graciously allowing you to know it exists. The visa appointment lasted almost 2 hours. I walked out with a packet of materials and a feeling I recognized from the moments in my career when the transport window had been confirmed and the equipment was checked and the patient was stable and there was nothing left between the present and the destination, but the distance itself, settled, complete, moving. I met Constance at a small Italian place in the South End where the tables were close, and the ambient noise meant that any conversation remained private without effort. The bread arrived in a cloth basket and smelled of rosemary, and I told her what I was considering, and she looked at me over her wine and said, "Francis, you have clearly already decided. Why are you still calling it a consideration?" She was right. I knew she was right the way you know something you've been knowing, without admitting. I said, "I haven't told anyone." She said, "You're not obligated to." "They'll be upset." She said, "People who are upset about other people living their lives are telling you something important about what they thought those lives were for." I went home from that dinner thinking about that sentence for 3 days. On the 23rd of June, I signed a lease, 12 months, a ground-floor apartment in a city called Viana do Castelo, which sits at the mouth of the Lima River where it opens into the Atlantic, in the northwest of Portugal, a city of old stone buildings and ornate churches and a market where on Fridays you can buy fish that was in the ocean the day before. Gerald's colleague had mentioned it by name in 2016. I had written it on a Post-it note and put it inside my planner, and it had moved through 3 subsequent planners with me over the years, transferred each January when I started the new one, always to the same place, inside the front cover. A city on a coast, a name that sounded like what it was, a place I had never been but that had been waiting, patiently, on the inside cover of my calendar for 7 years. The apartment had a small courtyard where something was growing in terracotta pots. What exactly I did not know yet. The photographs were not close enough. And a kitchen with yellow tile that was original to the building, laid sometime in the mid-20th century, slightly uneven in the way that handmade things are uneven, alive. The bedroom window faced west. The monthly rent, converted to dollars at the exchange rate that June, was less than my Massachusetts property taxes. I sat at Gerald's white oak table after I sent the wire transfer, and I put both palms flat on the surface of it, and I felt the wood, the grain of it, the way he had finished it smooth but not glassy, just smooth enough that you could feel the wood still being what it was. And I thought, he would have loved this. Not just Portugal, not just the idea of it, the audacity of deciding. He would have loved that I was doing the thing we had talked about in the abstract and were running out of time to make real. He would have said, probably while squinting at the lease, "The bathrooms better be decent. I called no one. I want to be precise about why I called no one, because it was not secrecy for its own sake, and it was not cruelty, and it was not cowardice. I had spent 31 years making decisions under conditions that did not allow for consultation. You cannot call a committee when a patient is coding at 30,000 feet. You make your assessment, you act, and you stand behind it." I had learned, more profoundly than most people have occasion to learn, that the time between deciding and announcing is not wasted time. It is the time in which the decision becomes real. Other people's opinions are like weather on a structure that isn't cured yet. You let it set. You let it become what it's going to be. Then you open the door. My decision was setting. I could feel it. In the folder I was building in my nightstand drawer, page by page, over the following months. The lease, the visa timeline documentation, the conversation with my financial advisor, a careful woman named Harriet, who had a silver braid and who, when I told her what I was planning, said simply, "Let me run the numbers," and called me back the following afternoon to confirm that the numbers were fine. The tentative conversation with a property manager about leasing the Massachusetts house. The email threads with Sophia in Lisbon about what to bring, what not to bring, what you cannot know until you arrive. July arrived, and Odette went back to work, and the logistics of 2 full-time jobs and 2 children under 5 became visible from the outside in the way that such things always are, when the arrangement that was holding them together changes. I was available that summer in a way I would not always be, and I knew it, and I spent time with Mira and Theo because I wanted to, truly wanted to. I want you to understand this, because the story I am telling you is not a story about a woman who held her grandchildren at arm's length in order to make a point. It is a story about a woman who loved her grandchildren entirely, and also had a separate life that was hers. I took Mira to a children's theater production in July, an adaptation of some fairy tale in which all the woodland creatures wore papier-mâché masks that were slightly too large for the children wearing them and tilted at concerning angles throughout, which Mira found either frightening or hilarious. I was never entirely sure which, because she held my hand the entire performance with a grip that meant something, and giggled at the wolf. I drove over on a Saturday in late July when Odette was catching up on work she'd fallen behind on, and I stood in their kitchen with Theo on my shoulder while he worked on the slow and complicated project of falling asleep. The baby smell of him, that specific warm bread and laundry softness. I walked slow circles in the kitchen with him until he stopped arguing with sleep and gave in, and I put him down in the crib carefully. And I stood over him for a moment looking at this very small person who had opinions about things he had no words for yet. I loved him then. I love him now. Both things. Always. But I noticed in those months something I could not unfeel once I had felt it. I was not present to Bram as a person making choices. I was present as a resource. This is a distinction that sounds small until you live it, and then it is not small at all. The calls came not as, "Mom, are you free Saturday?" but as, "Mom, we need you Saturday." The Saturday arrangements did not come with thanks for the Saturday before or the one before that. They came with the brisk efficiency of someone who has learned they can rely on a thing and has stopped noticing the thing itself. I do not say this with bitterness. I say it because it is true, and because it is the specific truth that explains everything that came after. One afternoon in late August, I was at their house, the 3rd Tuesday in a row I had driven over, and Mira was under the kitchen table conducting some private experiment with a set of wooden blocks and the periodic refusal to explain her methodology. And Theo was in the bouncer making the sounds he made when he was deciding whether or not to protest his life. And I was washing the lunch dishes because they were there, and I had 2 hands, and Bram came into the kitchen in the particular way he has. When he is going to ask something he has already decided he is entitled to ask. He said, "Mom, can you stay through dinner? I've got a call at 4:30 and it's going to run long." And I said yes, because of course I did. I said yes because Mira was under the table and Theo was in the bouncer, and Bram needed me to say yes. And I love my children in the operational way, the way that means you say yes when they need you. But I was supposed to drive to Northampton that afternoon for a lecture at a gallery there. A Portuguese photographer whose work I had seen described in an art magazine and been curious about for months. I had been looking forward to it in the specific way you look forward to something that is entirely your own, that you have not told anyone about, that has no utility for anyone but yourself. I texted the gallery, said I couldn't make it, and stayed. And Bram said thank you, eventually, at around 7:30 when I was putting my coat on to leave. He said it while scrolling through his phone. He meant it. But what he did not know, what it would never have occurred to him to ask, was what I had set aside to be there. And that absence, the absence of knowing that there was something to set aside, was the thing I had been filing, month after month. In my nightstand drawer, metaphorically, alongside the lease and the visa documentation and the flight I had not yet bought, but was going to buy as soon as I confirmed the date. In September, Mira had a week of illness, a mild cold that was more inconvenience than anything alarming, but that meant she couldn't go to preschool, and someone needed to be with her. Odette had a product launch. Bram had something he called a thing. which he did not elaborate on, and I did not ask him to, because I have a sense for when asking will not produce useful information. I drove over 3 mornings in a row. Mira, to her credit, was an excellent sick person. She wanted to do puzzles and read and watch one video about penguins that she had clearly already watched 70 times and that she narrated, mostly correctly, under her breath. On the 3rd day, while she slept on the couch under a fleece blanket that smelled of fabric softener and her own particular warm child smell, I sat at Bram's kitchen table with a cup of tea that had gone cold while I wasn't paying attention. I looked at my phone. The calendar open. October 15th, visa appointment confirmation, October 21st, lease start date. November 2nd, the date on the one-way ticket that I had, that morning, decided I was going to purchase when I got home. I looked at the cold tea. I thought, something is going to happen before November 2nd. I could feel it the way you feel pressure change in the hours before weather moves in. Not specific, not visual, but unmistakable. A certainty without content. Something was coming. I put my phone away and I let Mira sleep, and I sat at that table in the quiet of a house that trusted me to be there, in the company of my own particular readiness. I bought the ticket when I got home, one way. Logan Airport to Porto Aeroporto Francisco Sá Carneiro, connecting through Lisbon, November 2nd, departing at 6:20 in the evening. The confirmation email arrived with the particular soft ping of something irrevocable, and I read it through twice, and I set my phone face down on the kitchen table, and I sat there in the quiet of my own house and let the silence be exactly as large as it was. The dinner was Bram's idea. He called to organize it 2 weeks before. He called in the early evening, which is when he calls when he is in organizational mode rather than checking in mode, and he said he thought it would be nice to have a family gathering before the season turned, and would I come? And of course I said yes. The dinner was on the 2nd Saturday of October. I want you to understand the room. Bram and Odette's dining room, which they had repainted the previous year in a color Odette called warm sand, which I had helped choose during a Sunday afternoon visit, with paint chips and opinions. 2 folding tables pushed together and covered with a cream-colored cloth, with a small embroidered border that Odette brought out when she wanted a meal to feel like an occasion. Fake autumn branches on the sideboard. I believe they were from a home goods store, and they were, honestly, quite good. The leaves had a convincing texture. Candles in glass holders. The baby monitor on the sideboard. Theo already asleep upstairs, his breathing converting itself into soft static. Odette had been cooking since the afternoon. I know this because I arrived early. I always arrive early. It is a professional habit I never broke. And I found her in the kitchen with the particular focus of someone in the last stage of something that cannot be interrupted. She was making a lamb dish with olives and preserved lemon that she had been refining for 2 years, and that had reached, by this dinner, a level I would describe without hyperbole as genuinely excellent. I offered to help. She gave me the salad, which was its own way of saying the kitchen was hers. 12 people at the table, Bram and Odette, Petra and her husband Cal, who teaches high school history, and who has the quality I most admire in a person, which is that he says less than he knows. Renata, my sister-in-law, with her silver-streaked hair and her habit of reaching out and touching your arm when she is making a point, which she does often. Bram's college friend Devin, who lived nearby, a compact man with a beard, who I had always liked for the simple reason that he was honest about not understanding things, which is rarer than it sounds. Odette's sister, Margot, a small woman with close-cropped dark hair and a way of touching her own collarbone when she is uncomfortable, which I have noticed since the first time I met her, and Odette's parents, Ray and Sylvie, who had driven up from New Jersey and brought a bottle of good Burgundy that was placed, I noticed, at Bram's end of the table. I was seated in the middle of one of the long sides, not at either head. The middle, I noticed. Mira was at her own small table in the corner. Bram had set it up and decorated it with a small vase of flowers and a place card with her name on it in Odette's handwriting, which Mira was extremely pleased about and referred to 3 times before the first course was served. She had a deconstructed version of the lamb, the olives removed, the sauce on the side, and she ate it with the methodical focus of a child who takes food seriously. The meal moved the way a meal moves, when there is something waiting for after dessert. The conversation covered the expected ground. Something in the news, Devon's Kitchen Renovation, a film Petra and Cal had seen at the Art Cinema in Northampton. Ray discussed a golf tournament in more detail than the table required. This is not a criticism. It is a description of Ray, who is a good man with a circumscribed range of enthusiasms. Sylvie refilled water glasses with the quiet efficiency of someone who has been attending to the comfort of rooms for 40 years. Odette kept glancing at Bram, and Bram kept looking like a man who was organizing himself towards something. I ate the lamb. I took a second portion. It deserved it. Then Bram stood up. He didn't tap his glass. He just stood, and the table settled the way tables do when the person who organized the evening makes themselves vertical. Something shifted in the room. You could feel it in the air, a change of pressure, something about to happen that had already happened in someone's head. Bram said, "I just wanted to take a minute, while everyone's here, to share something we've been thinking through as a family." He said, "As a family," with the particular warmth of someone who believes he is saying something generous. "We've been doing a lot of planning," he said, "about the next chapter, for all of us. And we've come up with something we're really excited about, and we wanted to share it with everyone tonight." He looked at Odette. She looked at him. Something passed between them, something practiced, something that had been rehearsed at least once. "Mom is going to be moving in with us," he said. "We've set up the spare room. It's really nice. Odette picked out curtains. It looks great. And she's going to be helping with the kids full time. Having her there every day is going to be amazing for Mira and Theo, and honestly, the kids need that kind of consistent presence that we just can't always give them with our schedules. And this way, Mom is close to family and not alone in that big house. And we really think this is what's best for everyone going forward." He sat down. The table made a sound, not quite applause, but the sound of people preparing to be enthusiastic. Renata said, "Oh, Francis, how lovely." Ray said something affirmative. Devon nodded into his wine. Margot touched her collarbone. And I had a bite of lamb on my fork, halfway to my mouth. I set it down. He had not looked at me once during the announcement. Not while he was saying it, not immediately after. He had looked at Odette. He had looked around the table at the people receiving the news. He had looked briefly at Mira's corner, as though checking that she was absorbed in her food. He had not looked at me. The announcement was not addressed to me. It was made about me, to the room, the way you tell people about an arrangement that has already been determined. The table was looking at me now, in the warm, expectant way of people who think they are witnessing the good news moment, waiting for my face to do something grateful, waiting for me to confirm the plan by accepting it in front of witnesses. I placed my fork precisely on the edge of my plate. I picked up my napkin and put it in my lap. I looked at Bram. He was accepting Cal's congratulations with the ease of a man who has solved something. I looked at Odette, and here is what I want you to understand about what I saw. She was reaching forward to refill her water glass, and for a fraction of a second, before she controlled it, something moved across her face that I recognized. I have seen it on 100 faces, in 100 different rooms, in hospital corridors, in transport bays, in waiting areas when the news is delivered. It is the look of a person who has been carrying a weight long enough that they are no longer certain it will ever be set down. She had spent 3 months clearing that room, measuring those windows, choosing those curtains, building a structure around a decision she had made by assuming mine. She was doing it, at least in part, because she was genuinely frightened, not of me, but of the arithmetic of 2 careers and 2 children and 0 margin. She had identified a resource, and she had secured it in the only way she knew how to secure things, by planning around it before anyone could say no. She was not cruel. She was tired, and she was practical, and she had learned to solve her own problems, and the problem required a solution, and she had believed, not unreasonably given the evidence I had given her, that I was available to be that solution. I understood her. I understood all of it. None of it changed anything. I said, "Bram." He turned. The first time he had looked directly at me since the announcement began. There was the beginning of a smile on his face, the beginning of the moment where he expected me to confirm the plan, to express surprise or gratitude or both, to complete the exchange in the way he had scripted it. "I appreciate that you've put thought into this," I said. The smile held, steady, waiting. "I have some news of my own," I said. The table shifted again, that pressure change, that sense of a room recalibrating. I reached for my water glass, took a sip, set it down. I said, I've signed a lease on an apartment in Portugal, in a city called Viana do Castelo on the Atlantic coast. My visa was approved on the 15th. My flight leaves on November 2nd. 3 weeks from that Saturday, the room went very quiet, quiet enough to hear the baby monitor on the sideboard, the soft static of Theo breathing. Outside, somewhere on the street, a car with an exhaust problem passed and faded. The candles on the table burned without moving. Bram said, "What?" Just that, one syllable. "I've been planning it for most of the year," I said. "The lease is 12 months. I expect it will be longer. I wasn't sure how to bring it up, but your announcement tonight seemed like the right moment." Petra made a sound. I looked at her across the table. She had her hand pressed over her mouth, and above it her eyes were wide and very bright, and clearly losing an argument with themselves. Cal had put his hand on her arm. Bram said, "Mom, you can't, we set up the room." "I know," I said. "I'm sorry about the curtains." The silence that came after was the kind I have learned to let exist without filling. I spent 31 years in rooms where silence was information, where the absence of sound told you more than the presence of it. I let this silence do its work. Odette was the one who spoke next. She said quietly, "When did you decide this?" "June," I said. "I signed the lease in June." Something moved across her face again, and this time she didn't catch it as quickly. It wasn't anger. I want to be clear about that. It was something harder to name than anger. It was the look of a woman who has been doing a calculation for months and has just realized that the number she was calculating from was never on the table. She had been solving for a variable that wasn't a variable. She had built an entire structure, the cleared room, the curtains, the plan, the dinner, the announcement, around an assumption that had not been an assumption on my end. On my end, it had been a decision, made quietly, documented properly, and already set in motion. Ray said, from his end of the table, "Good for you, Francis," in the easy, unencumbered tone of a man who recognizes when a situation is not his to manage. Sylvie said, "Portugal is beautiful." Devon reached for the bread. Bram looked at me the way his father used to look at things he was in the process of rearranging to fit his understanding. He said, "You're serious?" "Entirely," I said. "I have been entirely serious about this for 11 months. He said, "What about the kids?" I said, "I love Mira and Theo. I will be a wonderful grandmother from Portugal. I will visit. They can visit me when they are old enough, and I will show them the river where it meets the ocean. And Mira will love it, and Theo won't remember it, but there will be photographs." I picked up my fork and the second portion of lamb. "The lamb is exceptional, Odette. You've finally got the olive ratio right." Odette let out a breath, not a sigh, something more structural than that. The sound of something that has been under pressure releasing. Not relief, exactly, but close. I finished my dinner. The table found its way back to conversation eventually, the way tables do after a thing has happened and no one quite knows what to do with it yet. Renata asked Devon about his kitchen renovation. Ray finished his wine. Margot moved her food around her plate. Mira came to show me a game she had invented at the small table that involved arranging the place card, with her name on it, in different positions, and declaring each one a different kind of official document. A passport, a certificate, a ticket. I told her all of them were excellent. She accepted this and went back to her table. I stayed until 9. I said goodbye to everyone with the same calm I had carried through the whole dinner, because the calm was not performance. I was not performing anything. I was simply a woman who had made a decision 11 months ago and was watching it become real, and the becoming real was proceeding exactly as she had expected. Bram walked me to my car. The night was cold, October cold with something damp in it, and the porch light made shadows on the driveway. He stood with his arms crossed in the way he has had since he was 11 years old. He said, "I don't understand why you didn't tell me." I said, "I needed to let it be real before I introduced it to other people's reactions." "That's not how families work," he said. "Bram," I said, "you just announced to 11 people what I would be doing with my life, without asking me. That is not how families work either." He uncrossed his arms. He looked at the driveway. "I know," he said. I got in my car. I drove home through the October dark with the heater on and the radio off and the sense of something having been completed. Not closed. Completed. The way a form is completed when you've signed at the bottom and there's nothing left to add. I made tea when I got home. I sat at Gerald's table and I took the folder out and looked at it. The lease, the visa confirmation, the flight itinerary, the documentation Harriet had prepared, a year of careful, quiet building. And then I put it away and finished my tea. The following week was Bram calling. He called 3 times in 4 days. The conversation started from different places, confusion, frustration, negotiation, and ended at the same place, which was him saying some version of, "I don't understand why you would do this," and me saying some version of, "I know," and neither of us being wrong about what we were saying. On Tuesday afternoon, he came by the house. He stood in the kitchen he had grown up in, the kitchen with the window above the sink, that had a loose latch Gerald had meant to fix for 15 years, the kitchen that smelled of the tea I had just made, and the old particular smell of a house where the same people have lived for decades, a smell that is warmth and wood, and something underneath it all you could not isolate. And he looked around the room in a way I recognized, the way you look at something you thought you knew. He sat down at the kitchen table, a big man, like Gerald, and when he sits, he becomes somehow more available to himself, less armored. He put both hands on the table. He said, "I should have asked you." "Yes," I said. "I just assumed. I don't know. It seemed obvious. You're—" He stopped. He started again. "I thought you'd want to be close to the kids. I love the kids," I said, "but you want Portugal more." "It's not a competition," I said. "I want my life, Bram, the one I haven't had yet. I've had a great many good years of other people's lives. Now I want some of mine." He was quiet for a moment. I made 2 cups of coffee with the 12-cup drip machine that has been making the same small sounds of polite argument when it finishes since I bought it in 2015, and I put one in front of him and sat across from him with mine. He said, "Are you angry at me?" I thought about it honestly. I said, "I was, for about an hour last Saturday. Then I wasn't." "What changed?" I stopped being surprised, I said. I realized I had let it get to this point. I had been available and quiet for a long time, and you had learned to read that as permanent. I let you read it that way. That's partly on me. He looked up. He had not expected me to say that, but only partly when I said. We drank the coffee. It was not particularly good coffee. The machine was overdue for replacing, but it was hot, and there is a specific utility in holding something hot when you are having a conversation that costs something. Mira called him at some point, and he answered and told her he would be home for bath time, and he hung up and looked at his phone and said, "She's going to miss you." "I know," I said. "I'm going to miss her." "You could stay 1 more year," he said, quietly. Not a demand, just a thing placed on the table to see how it landed. I looked at him. I said, "Bram, I'm 70. He heard it, the number and what the number meant. He heard it land. He didn't ask again. He left at around 6. He hugged me at the door the way he has always hugged, firmly and briefly the way Gerald hugged, and I held on for a moment, and then I let him go, and I stood in the doorway and watched him drive away, and I thought, he will be all right. He's not a bad person. He is a person who learned a thing and will now have to unlearn it, which is hard work but possible work, and he is, under the assumptions and the obliviousness, a good father who loves his children and meant well by his mother, even when the meaning well looked like what it looked like. I closed the door. I went back to packing. The packing was where I lived for 3 weeks, and I want to tell you about it, because the packing was where I understood what I was actually taking and what I was actually leaving, which are different questions than they sound. The house needed arranging before I could leave. I was not selling. Not then, not yet. I was leasing it to a couple from Vermont, remote workers who wanted proximity to the Berkshires, and who had, in our single meeting, struck me as people who would treat a house as a house is meant to be treated, which is to say, lived in, not preserved. The property manager was a man named Greg, who wore canvas sneakers in October, and who communicated in sentences of necessary length and no more, which I found refreshing. He handled the arrangements with the efficiency of someone who has done this many times and does not find it complicated, because it isn't. I was not taking much. This was intentional. You learn 31 years of moving through airports and hospitals and transport vehicles. with a specific weight limit, what you actually use versus what you own. You learn that most things people keep are furniture for an idea of themselves. They are not quite living. I had a shipping crate for some things, certain books I knew I would reread, a kitchen knife set that I have had for 20 years, and that has been sharpened correctly, and that I was not willing to replace, a hand-painted bowl I bought on a layover in Lisbon in 1998. It had been on my kitchen windowsill ever since. The photograph of Gerald and me on the coast of Sardinia in 1996, him with his arm around my shoulders, both of us squinting into afternoon light, both of us looking exactly like what we were. In our late 40s, and probably happy, believing we had a great deal of time. Gerald's table I left in the house. The Vermont couple could use it. A table should be used. He built it to be used. I kept 2 things of his that fit in a bag. His watch, a Seiko he wore every day for 20 years, with a small nick on the crystal from the time he dropped it on a hiking trail in New Hampshire, a nick so small you could only feel it with your thumbnail and not see it without light, and a book of crossword puzzles, one of those thick paperback collections, with his handwriting in the margins. He never finished any of them. He worked them in pen up to the point of real difficulty, then switched to pencil, and then at the truly intractable clues, he simply wrote a small question mark and moved on. I had always loved that about him, the honest acknowledgement of not knowing, the willingness to name the gap and keep going. I was going to Portugal with a watch that had a nicked crystal and a book full of question marks. I thought that was enough. I think I was right. Petra drove me to the airport. Petra, who had known about the plan since August, she had found me at the kitchen table one Sunday with the folder open. She had looked at it and said, "What is all that?" And I had told her, and she had listened with her elbows on the table and her chin in her hands, and at the end she had said simply, "Good," and then poured herself more wine, and we had talked about Portugal for an hour. She had kept it, completely, not because I asked her to. I hadn't, but because she understood, in the way that Petra usually understands things, that it wasn't hers to tell. She pulled up to the departures entrance at Logan at 6:45 in the morning, the sky still mostly dark, the airport moving in the particular organized rush of early travel. We sat in the running car for a moment with the heater on. She said, "Call me when you land." I said, "I always call." "Mom, I know. We are not a family that holds its feelings at length for examination. We learned that from Gerald. We express things through doing and through showing up and through knowing, in the way of people who have been around each other long enough. When a thing is being said underneath the thing being said, what was being said underneath, 'Call me when you land,' was everything. Everything that didn't need to be listed, because it was already between us. I got out. I lifted my bag from the back seat. I walked through the sliding glass doors without looking back. Not because I didn't want to, but because there was nothing uncertain behind me. The certain things you can leave without looking. You carry them with you regardless. The flight was 9 hours with a short connection in Lisbon. I slept for 5 hours and woke to the Atlantic below, enormous and gray, and completely itself, moving in all the directions it moves in, which is all of them. I ate the airline meal, which was not an experience, and I did 2 of Gerald's crossword puzzles from the book and left them unfinished in exactly the way he always left them. Question marks at the hard parts, a kind of conversation across years, a way of saying, "I tried this too. I will tell you about arriving because the arriving is the promise." I took a bus north from Porto, through country that was green and hilly, and occasional with villages I did not yet know the names of. The light was doing what October light does in the late afternoon in that part of the world, running out of angle, going horizontal, laying itself across things in a way that makes them look lit from somewhere inside. The bus followed the coast for a stretch, and I could see the Atlantic through the window, wide and dark and going on forever to the west. And I felt something that I had been waiting to feel for 11 months, and possibly longer. Something that was not quite relief, and not quite arrival, but lived between them, the feeling of a current that has been moving underground, finally finding the surface. The city, when I reached it, was everything, and also more particular than everything. The old buildings, stone and pale plaster, fronted with blue and white tile work that caught the last light. Cobblestones damp from an afternoon rain I had missed, the smell of it still in the air, salt and stone and something green, a living smell. The smell of a place that has been itself for a very long time and is not performing anything for your benefit. I had the address. I had the lockbox number. I walked there from the bus stop with my bag, which was not heavy, which I had made sure was not heavy. The click of the deadbolt when I opened the door was different from any lock I had used before. Heavier, more deliberate. European locks have an opinion about being locks, a seriousness about the purpose they serve, and this one said, plainly and without fanfare, "You are inside now. This is inside." The apartment was dark when I entered. The yellow tile in the kitchen caught the last of the courtyard light coming through the window, and it was, in that moment, the most specific thing I had ever seen. Not beautiful in a way I had expected, beautiful in the way of something that is exactly what it is, no more, no less. Yellow tile, slightly uneven, warm, old, real. I stood in the middle of the kitchen and put my bag down, and I let the silence of the place come to me. The silence of a place that does not know you yet, that is neutral in the way that all beginnings are neutral, that does not care whether you are brave or frightened or 70 years old, and standing in a kitchen in Portugal thinking about everything that led here. I stood there for a while. Then I unpacked Gerald's watch and set it on the kitchen counter. The nick on the crystal caught the light. Then I put water on for tea. The kettle was electric and had been left by the previous tenant and made a sound like a small polite clearing of the throat when it finished. I made tea with a bag from a packet I found in the cabinet above the stove. Something local, something herbal, something I had no name for, and I stood at the window with the cup and looked at the courtyard, which had in the terracotta pot something growing that I identified eventually as rosemary, and something else I didn't recognize for another 2 weeks. I drank my tea. I was not waiting for anything. That was the thing I noticed. I was standing in an unfamiliar kitchen in a city I had never been in, with fewer possessions than I had owned since I was in my 20s, without anyone expecting anything from me that evening or the following morning. And I was not waiting. I'd spent 5 years since Gerald died in the faint, low-level state of waiting, for grief to pass, for clarity to come, for permission to want something again. I had spent decades before that in the patient readiness that nursing required, the waiting for the window to open, the condition to stabilize, the decision to make itself. I was good at waiting. I had become, perhaps, too good at it. The tea tasted of something I couldn't name. Mild and slightly sweet, not unpleasant. I finished it. I washed the cup. I made the bed with the sheets I'd brought in my bag, because I will not sleep in strangers' sheets, a professional habit, perfectly reasonable. And I opened the bedroom window a crack, and the night air came in, salt cold, oceanic, the smell of the Atlantic from 2 streets away. I lay down in the dark of my bedroom in Portugal, and I listened to the city doing what cities do at night, the distant traffic, a conversation in the street below that rose and ebbed and resolved, a church bell somewhere doing the 11 o'clock. And I felt the specific weight of a day that has changed something. I slept 9 hours. I want to tell you now about the days after the dinner, the weeks, the ways things shifted, because this is not a story where a door closes and the closed door is the end. That is not how things work, and it is not what I experienced. Bram and Odette found their solution. They did it in the way that most people find solutions when the one they planned on disappears, through the specific creativity that necessity produces. Odette went to her firm and asked, with the directness of someone who has decided to ask for what she needs rather than engineer the circumstances, about remote work. They gave her 3 days a week from home without significant resistance, which tells you something about how valuable she was, and possibly also something about what she had been afraid to find out. The arithmetic changed. They found a childcare share with 2 neighboring families, a rotating arrangement among people who liked each other, and Mira, who was a child of intense social preferences, reportedly decided this was the best development in the history of her life. Bram told me all of this in a call in December. His voice had a quality I recognized, the voice of someone telling good news that has the faint aftertaste of understanding, something they should have understood before. He didn't name the understanding. He didn't have to. I said, "That sounds wonderful. How is Theo sleeping?" "Better," he said. "A lot better, actually." "And you?" A pause. "Short. but real. Getting there, he said. Good, I said. The spare room, the room with Odette's sage green curtains, which I learned eventually were linen, a good quality linen, which of course they were, because Odette does not choose badly when she has time to choose carefully, became her home office. She set up her desk under the window. She put a photograph of the children on the desk. She called me in January to tell me about it, and at the end of the call she said, with the particular effort of someone who has practiced what they want to say, "I hope you understand that we weren't trying to... We didn't think of it as..." I said, "Odette." She stopped. "You were solving a problem," I said. "I understand that. You were solving it with the information you had, and some of the information you had was wrong." A pause. Then, "We should have asked." "Yes," I said, "you should have." Longer pause. And then quietly, a different register. "The apartment sounds beautiful, from what Bram said." "It is," I said. "Genuinely. You should come, all of you." Mira would lose her mind over the pastéis de nata. She laughed. It surprised her. The laugh. And genuine things that surprise you out are the truest things you can produce. She said, "We might take you up on that." "I'm counting on it," I said. Renata called in the spring. I had not expected it, and I was glad she did. She called on a Thursday morning when I was in the kitchen making coffee. I had found a small cafe nearby that sold locally roasted beans, and I had been buying them weekly since November, and they were, legitimately, very good. And she said, "I've been thinking about you." I said, "I've been thinking about you too." She said, "Is it what you thought?" I considered the question. I said, "It's better in the specific ways that matter, and different in the ways that don't." She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "I envy you." I said, "Come visit." She said, "Maybe I will." She's the kind of person for whom maybe means something real, not a deflection, and I'm hoping she means it. Petra came in April, which I had not expected, but also had. Petra is a person who does what she says she will do, usually faster than you expect and with less announcement than you are prepared for. She arrived on a Thursday with a small rolling bag and a bottle of wine from a region she had researched, and she stayed for 11 days. We walked the city. We took a boat on the river. We drove along the coast to a beach that was almost entirely empty in April and sat on a wall at the edge of it with sandwiches from a place in town, the wind coming off the Atlantic cold and constant, and Petra looked at the water for a long time and said, "I understand why you came here." I said, "Do you?" She said, "He would have loved it." We did not say his name. We didn't need to. I have been learning the city the way you learn a language, slowly, by making mistakes, by getting things wrong and trying again, by accumulating specific knowledge in place of general impression. I know which mornings the bread at the bakery 3 streets over is fresh. Tuesdays and Saturdays are the reliable ones. Friday is uncertain depending on whether Marco came in early, and Marco is a man whose relationship with early mornings is, shall we say, philosophical. The couple who run the bakery are named Marco and Inés has a laugh you can hear from half a block away, the kind of laugh that cannot be produced by someone who is pretending to find something funny, and Marco always slips an extra roll into the bag without remarking on it, which I consider an act of profound hospitality. I have a walk I take most mornings, down through the old city, past the church whose bells I have stopped noticing and then heard again on a morning in February, when something about the light made the sound new, along the streets that go downhill, toward water, and out to the point where the Lima River widens and slows before it meets the sea. I stand there for some amount of time. Whatever the weather is doing, I am outside in it. The Portuguese have a word, or rather a feeling, for which English has no equivalent. The feeling of being in a place that has held something, longing, beauty, the sense of something irretrievable, and sitting with it rather than fleeing it. I learned this word months after I arrived. By then, I had been practicing the feeling for a while without knowing its name. I have been teaching myself watercolor, badly. My former colleague Constance told me she had taken up oil painting in France and showed me a photograph of one of her canvases, which was honestly quite striking, and I said so, and she said the first 6 months of painting were almost entirely humiliation, and that after that you simply stopped caring and started looking, and the looking was the thing, I am in the humiliation phase. My paintings are made of enthusiasm and very little technique, which I find unexpectedly freeing. After 31 years of being technically competent under conditions where competence was not optional, being bad at something I am choosing is a genuine pleasure. My teacher here, a woman named Angela who teaches from a studio above a shop that sells fishing equipment, has told me I have an interesting relationship with perspective, which I have chosen to interpret as a compliment. My knee still has opinions about cold mornings. The medication continues. My doctor here, Dr. Antunes, a precise and somewhat serious woman who reviewed my records with the focus of someone reading an interesting document, said, in English that was considerably better than my Portuguese, "You have the physiology of a person who never stopped moving. Whatever you have been doing, continue." I told her I intended to. Gerald's watch is on the kitchen counter. Every morning when I make coffee, I see the nick in the crystal where the light catches it. I have thought about having it repaired. I have decided not to. Here is what I know from this distance, from this particular courtyard in this particular city, in the morning light, with the coffee from Marco's bakery that Inez insisted I try one Thursday morning, and has become a habit. I know that the thing Bram did was not malicious. I know he did it from love, which was real, and from assumption, which was human, and from the specific confidence of a child who grew up with a mother who showed up and believed she would always show up, because showing up was how she expressed what she could not always put into words. He learned love as presence, and he assumed presence was permanent. That is my doing as much as it is his nature. I do not blame him for the lesson. I blame neither of us for it. I only note what it cost when no one examined it. I know that Odette was scared in the specific way of someone who is very capable and has discovered that capability has limits, and that when you discover those limits, you reach for the nearest available help, and I was the nearest available help. And it did not occur to her to ask because she had seen enough evidence that I would say yes, that asking seemed like a formality. She was wrong, but she was not wrong about my history. My history gave her every reason to believe what she believed. I know that they planned the next chapter of my life at a dinner table, over a very good lamb dish, with sage green curtains already hung in a room that was never going to be mine. They planned it with genuine feeling, with real love, in the belief that what they were proposing was the right thing, and that I would see it as the right thing once they presented it clearly enough. They forgot, or perhaps never knew, that I was not waiting to be told what the right thing was. I had already decided. They forgot to ask the one person living the life they were arranging. Had already answered. And now, I am here, in a place I chose, in a life I built in the quiet months when everyone who loved me was busy assuming I was settled, and the river at the end of my morning walk is wide and dark and completely itself, moving toward the sea with the unhurried certainty of something that knows exactly where it is going. Some people will plan your life at dinner. Some people have already left. I was already somewhere else when they were passing the rolls. I am there still, in the river, in the morning, where it opens into the Atlantic, and the light comes across it sideways, gold and without apology, moves the way things move when they have been moving long enough to stop explaining themselves, without hurry, without asking permission, with the settled and absolute authority of something that has always known what it is. I watch it every morning. I have nowhere else I need to be.